The early morning sun poured through the fogged windows of the Maple and Pine Diner, casting soft golden light onto the polished wood tables. The place was alive with chatter voices blending in a harmonious hum of small-town life. The clink of coffee cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the rhythmic click-clack of silverware on plates created a warm, familiar melody. Steam rose from mugs, swirling upward in delicate tendrils before vanishing into the cool air above. Maple and Pine wasn't just a diner, it was a place of comfort. The air smelled of freshly baked pastries and sizzling bacon, and the checkered floors echoed the hum of ordinary lives moving forward with the routine of their days. Regulars filled the seats, the chatter light and easy. For the majority, this place was home to smiles, laughter, and good food. Yet, among the steady stream of customers, there was one table where the usual hum fell silent. At table 7 sat a small boy, his legs swinging under the booth. His name was Eli Kingsley, a 5-year-old with a mop of messy blonde curls and eyes that seemed too big for his young face, wide, searching, yet profoundly empty. His small hands clutched a napkin, crumpling and unfolding it repeatedly. It was as if he were trying to piece together something lost. His gaze remained fixed on the napkin, the world around him barely existing. No one could reach him, not for 2 long years. Across from Eli sat his father, David Kingsley. At first glance, David looked every bit the epitome of success, a man who had it all. Dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that gleamed under the fluorescent diner lights, a Rolex glinting at his wrist, David exuded the confidence of someone who owned the world. He was a tech mogul, a billionaire several times over, and the brains behind some of the most innovative artificial intelligence companies in Silicon Valley. But sitting at this table, in this small-town diner, his wealth and success meant nothing. David scrolled mindlessly through his phone, barely aware of the world around him, his brow furrowed with a mixture of fatigue and frustration, but his eyes never left the screen. For all his accomplishments, he had failed in the one thing that truly mattered: connecting with his son. Eli's silence, his withdrawal from the world, was a constant ache in David's chest, an unsolvable puzzle he didn't know how to fix. And no matter how much money he threw at the best therapists, no matter how many specialists he saw, nothing had worked. Eli had been silent for 2 years, and David was running out of ideas. David was just as silent as his son. The silence between them was more than just the absence of words, it was the absence of connection. David couldn't fix Eli, he couldn't reach him, and every Saturday, the same pattern repeated itself. David would bring Eli to the Maple and Pine Diner, hoping somehow something would change. But nothing did, at least, not until now. Eli's silence was not born of rebellion, nor was it a phase to grow out of. It was born of pain, deep, searing pain. The day his mother died in a car accident, Eli lost not just his mother, but his ability to communicate. He didn't understand the finality of it, how a life that had once been full of laughter and love could disappear in an instant. But his silence was the only way he knew how to cope. For months after the accident, Eli withdrew from the world. At first, his father thought it was just grief. It was expected, after all. Children had a way of expressing sorrow in silence. Or, so David believed. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Eli's silence never wavered. By the time the specialists diagnosed him with selective mutism and trauma-induced anxiety, David had already tried every avenue he could think of. Speech therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, art therapy, play therapy. But nothing seemed to make a dent. The boy who once spoke with the carefree energy of any child had become a hushed shell of himself. Eli's eyes, once filled with curiosity and wonder, now appeared distant, like he was watching the world from behind a pane of glass. No one had ever been able to break through that wall. Yet David, though deeply frustrated, held on to a glimmer of hope. Every Saturday, he would bring Eli here, though, not because he thought it would help, but because it was the only place Eli didn't protest. Perhaps it was the comfort of routine. Maybe the diner's atmosphere made him feel safe. But whatever the reason, Eli would allow the weekly ritual to continue, and David, desperate for any connection with his son, complied. As David sat there at the table, eyes glued to his phone, he wondered if he'd ever truly reach Eli. His son ever speak again? Would they ever have a normal conversation? Or had the silence become too much a part of who Eli was now, a permanent fixture in their lives that no one could dismantle? David Kingsley wasn't an ordinary man. He was a visionary, a brilliant entrepreneur who had built an empire from the ground up. He had revolutionized the tech industry, and his name was synonymous with innovation. To the outside world, he seemed to have everything: a successful career, wealth, and influence. But when it came to his personal life, particularly his relationship with Eli, all that success felt hollow. David had spent years in boardrooms, shaping the future of artificial intelligence, guiding his companies to extraordinary heights. He could command the attention of CEOs, investors, and engineers. He was a master at making deals, a genius at understanding complex algorithms and code. But when it came to his son, David was lost. He didn't know how to be a father to a grieving child. He didn't know how to navigate the emotional landscape of a son who had closed off from the world. David had thrown money at the problem, as he did with most things in life, but no amount of money could bring Eli's voice back. The therapists said all the right words, but none of them helped Eli open up. Eli had become a puzzle David didn't know how to solve. And so, every Saturday, David would sit at the diner, trapped in his own thoughts, trying to juggle his responsibilities at work, with the desperate hope that somehow, someway, his son would return to him. But all David could do was sit in silence, waiting for something he wasn't sure would ever come. Every Saturday, David and Eli followed the same routine. David would leave his high-rise office in San Francisco, driving the 2-hour stretch of highway to the small town of Maplewood. It was a ritual that had started shortly after Eli stopped speaking, a way for David to keep some semblance of normalcy in their fractured lives. The diner was a simple place. Nothing fancy, but it was warm, and it was consistent. Eli liked the pancakes. He liked the way they were always served with a side of fresh fruit and syrup. But mostly, he liked the quiet hum of the diner, the chatter of the other customers, the sound of the coffee machine hissing, and the soft clink of silverware. It was a predictable comfort, and it was the one place Eli didn't shy away from. David had never really understood why. He didn't know it then, but it was Abby, the waitress with the warm smile and kind eyes, who made the difference. Abby had a way of making everyone feel special. She knew the regulars by name, always remembered their orders, and had a way of brightening the entire room with just a smile. It wasn't her job. It was who she was. To David, it was just another diner, another stop on his weekly routine. But to Eli, it was a small island of peace in a sea of confusion and grief. Abby, with her consistent kindness, had unknowingly become the anchor that held Eli steady in a world that had been spinning out of control. Abby didn't know the full story behind Eli's silence. She didn't know about the car crash, the loss, or the experts who couldn't help. But she saw the pain in Eli's eyes, and she recognized it. She had seen it in her own brother, Daniel, who had been mute for years after their parents' divorce. Abby knew that sometimes the best way to heal wasn't with words or therapies, but with patience and understanding. And so, she offered Eli kindness, nothing more, nothing less. David, meanwhile, remained oblivious. To him, Abby was just another friendly face in a small-town diner. His mind was always occupied with work, always distracted by the next big deal. But little did he know, Abby's small acts of kindness were the lifeline Eli needed. Abby Williams had been working at Maple and Pine for 4 years. At 27, she had found a home in the little town of Maplewood. The regulars loved her. She had a knack for making people feel like family. Her radiant smile and natural warmth were a balm to the weary, the lonely, and the tired. Everyone knew her as the girl with the sunny disposition, always ready with a kind word and a warm cup of coffee. But Abby's kindness wasn't something she had learned from books or classes. It was something born from her own experience. Her younger brother Daniel had been mute for nearly 4 years after their parents' divorce. Abby knew what it took to break through the walls that grief and trauma could build around someone. She had seen the toll it took on Daniel, how the silence consumed him, and how, slowly but surely, he found his way back. Abby didn't know the full story behind Eli's silence, but when she saw him for the first time, she recognized that same emptiness in his eyes, and she made a decision. She wouldn't push him to speak. She wouldn't bombard him with questions. Instead, she would offer him kindness, simple, consistent, unspoken kindness. Because sometimes, that was all it took. So, she started small. She brought him crayons and placemats to draw on. She left him little notes folded like fortune cookies, messages that offered no pressure, only companionship. She taught him to tap once for yes and twice for no, offering him a way to communicate. To most customers at Maple and Pine, Abby's job was simple: take orders, pour coffee, keep the booths clean. But to her, it was more than a job. She saw her work as a chance to make people feel human, especially those who carried burdens silently. From the first day she saw Eli, sitting still as a statue while his father stared into his phone, something tugged at her. Maybe it was the way his little fingers twisted the napkin over and over again. Maybe it was the heaviness in his eyes. Or maybe it was that old, familiar feeling, the one she had carried through the years of trying to reach her brother, Daniel. She knew how trauma could bury a voice. She remembered the helplessness, the long days filled with silence in their home, the way Daniel flinched when people tried to force words out of him. What helped her brother in the end wasn't pressure or perfection, it was presence. It was pertinence. It was someone staying by his side even when he said nothing. That memory shaped how she approached Eli. Instead of talking at him, she began to talk near him. "Your pancakes will be extra fluffy today," she'd say while setting the plate down gently. She'd slip him a tiny folded note. "What color is your favorite crayon today?" Some days she got nothing in return. Other days, he'd color quietly for 20 minutes. Once he tapped the table once when she asked if he liked strawberries. That single tap stayed with her the rest of the day. She started leaving a little box of crayons just for him under the counter, along with new placemats each week. They weren't much, sometimes a farm scene, other times superheroes, occasionally blank pages, just waiting for whatever Eli wanted to draw. She never commented on what he created, never praised or asked for explanations. She simply accepted it and thanked him for sharing. With time, Eli's posture softened slightly in her presence. He no longer turned away when she approached. His eyes began to follow her as she moved through the diner, and once, he smiled, barely a flicker. But real. Abby wasn't keeping track, but David was starting to notice. To David Kingsley, the world ran on speed, precision, and strategy. Every minute of his life had a return on investment, a KPI, a meeting scheduled weeks in advance. His personal calendar was a fortress, maintained by 3 assistants and reviewed nightly. His business life was seamless. His personal life, though, that was another story. When his wife died, he buried himself in work. It wasn't a decision, it was an instinct. What else was there to do? The woman he loved, the only one who had ever really known how to balance him out, was gone, and in her place was silence, pain, guilt. He had failed to protect her, and now, his son was slipping away too. He'd sat across from Eli at that diner every Saturday for months, hoping for something. A smile, a glance, a word. But each visit felt like a replay of the same ache and quiet. In between meetings and product launches, he would read reports from therapists and specialists. Every evaluation sounded the same. Eli is experiencing trauma-related mutism. We recommend continued support. But nothing changed. No one reached him. So when Eli tapped once for yes, in response to Abby's question about strawberries, one day, David's eyes flicked upward. Something about the interaction caught his attention. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't headline-worthy, but it was real. It was something. Still, he didn't act. Not yet. He was too used to deferring emotional things. He didn't know how to talk to his son, and he definitely didn't know how to talk to the waitress who somehow made his son smile. Instead, he kept scrolling, glancing at stock numbers and emails while something inside him began to shift. That Saturday started like any other. Abby had been up since 5 a.m., prepping coffee filters and wiping down tables. Eli and David arrived a little after 8 o'clock. David in his suit, Eli in his usual hoodie and jeans, napkin already in hand before they even sat down. But Abby had something different in mind. That week she'd found a tiny plastic lion at a thrift store. It wasn't anything expensive, just a small, golden brown figure with a fluffy mane and a proud little face. Something about it had spoken to her. Maybe it reminded her of Eli, quiet but brave. Strong, even when afraid. She placed it gently on the plate beside his pancakes, which she'd arranged in a smiley face, 2 blueberries for eyes, a strawberry slice for the mouth. Then she leaned in, her voice soft and patient. "Did you know," she said, "lions are still brave, even when they're scared." Eli didn't move. She stepped back, waiting. Seconds passed, then more. It seemed like another small gesture, maybe one that wouldn't go anywhere. She turned to walk away, and then Eli's fingers reached out. Tiny, slow, trembling. They brushed against the lion's mane, and then, with the softest whisper, barely audible even in the gentle din of the diner, he said it. "Lion." Everything froze. David's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table, screen down. He looked up, stunned, barely daring to breathe. His eyes locked on his son, who had not spoken a word in 2 years, and he felt his heart stop. "Did you?" he whispered, leaning forward. "Did you just say lion?" Eli didn't answer, but he didn't turn away. He didn't shrink into himself or flinch. He stayed still, his fingers clutching the toy, eyes fixed on it, as though the word had been pulled from a deep well inside him. Abby stood nearby, frozen mid-step, her breath caught in her throat. She felt tears burn in her eyes. All the mornings, all the gentle notes, all the crayons and placemats, and now, this. No one in the diners seemed to notice the miracle happening at table 7. The clatter of plates, the murmur of conversations, the scraping of forks, it all continued, unaware of the breakthrough taking place between a father, his son, and a waitress who refused to give up. David swallowed hard. Eli, he tried again, voice shaking. Eli didn't speak again, but he didn't need to. That one word, Leon, carried all the weight of 2 silent years. It was a crack in the dam, a whisper in a storm. It was enough. David leaned back, overwhelmed. He looked at Abby. Ray looked at her for the first time, and in her eyes, he saw no triumph, no pride, only compassion, only understanding. She didn't need recognition. She had only wanted to help, and she had. The next morning, the diner was quieter. A gray sky loomed outside, and the rain tapped gently against the windows. Abby moved between tables, refilling mugs and collecting plates. She was tired, emotionally exhausted from the day before. Eli's whispered word had echoed in her mind all night. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't her moment to share. It belonged to Eli. That's why, when she saw David walk through the door alone, her chest tightened. Was he upset? Had she overstepped? Had something gone wrong after they left? He waited at the counter as she finished pouring coffee. She walked over, nervous. "Hi," she said softly. David's expression was different. The tension in his brow was gone. The usual air of command had melted. He looked human, vulnerable. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said. Yesterday, that was the first word Eli's spoken since the accident. Abby lowered her gaze. "He did it himself. I just gave him space." "No," David said, more firmly now. "You saw him. You saw what no one else saw. I've spent millions trying to fix something. You reached with a $5 toy and pancakes." He pulled a small envelope from his coat and handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a check. 6 figures. Her eyes widened. She stepped back. I can't take this." "You can," he said, "because you didn't do it for money, and that's why it matters." Then came something that stunned her even more. "I want to start a foundation for kids like Eli, a place for children with selective mutism, trauma, anxiety, not another clinic, a real place where they're treated like people, not problems, and I want you to help lead it." Abby stared at him, speechless. "Me? But you're the only person who ever got through to my son. You're not just anything. You're the reason I heard my son's voice again." Abby didn't know what to say. She stood behind the counter, holding a 6-figure check in one hand and a stunned silence in her chest. David Kingsley had just asked her, a waitress in a small-town diner, to help lead a foundation not based on credentials or degrees, but on the kind of human understanding no school could teach. She blinked at him. "You want me to help lead a foundation?" David gave a small nod. "Not as a token gesture. Not as a figurehead. I want you involved in building it from the ground up, designing it around what worked for Eli, around empathy, patience, presence, the things money can't buy, but hearts can offer." Abby's laugh was quiet, nervous. "David, I don't even have a college degree. I don't know anything about nonprofits or therapy or foundations." "I know," he said, "and that's exactly why I'm asking you. You're not an expert. You're not trained to fix people. You just cared. That's what made the difference." Abby leaned back against the counter, her hands trembling slightly. Her gaze drifted to the lion figurine she'd placed beside the registry. I had forgotten it that day, but somehow she knew it wasn't really forgotten. He had left it with her. She thought of Daniel, her brother, and the years of silence. The tears no one understood, the way adults dismissed his trauma like it was just a phase. And then she thought of Eli, of his small, brave voice breaking through the quiet. All because someone believed in waiting. "I'll need help," she finally whispered. David smiled, the first true, unguarded smile she'd seen on him. "You'll have it." 3 months later, the Brave Voice Initiative officially launched. Headquartered in Northern California, with pilot programs in 3 states, California, Oregon, and Colorado, the foundation's mission was simple: to create safe, nurturing spaces for children with trauma-induced mutism and emotional withdrawal, where healing came through connection rather than correction. Abby worked side by side with child psychologists, educators, and parents to design programs that didn't start with "what's wrong with this child," but instead asked, "what has this child been through?" The core of the program was compassionate companionship, not therapy, not clinical routines, just time, space, listening. Each child was paired with a consistent adult presence who never asked for words but offered connection through play, drawing, music, or simple presence. It was Abby's approach with Eli, now turned into a structured, yet flexible practice. David personally funded the first 2 years of the initiative, declining media attention. What he wanted more than recognition was impact. He hired teams not for their degrees, but for their empathy. And at the heart of every program was a philosophy Abby had unknowingly embodied from the beginning. Don't push for sound. Wait for trust. The first center opened quietly in a repurposed community hall near Palo Alto. The walls were painted soft colors, filled with shelves of toys, art supplies, and cushions. There were no therapy couches, no harsh lights, no cold assessments, just warmth. Children came. Some didn't speak for days. Some never spoke at all. But the space gave them dignity. And slowly, small moments began to blossom, like a little girl who played the same song on a xylophone for 3 weeks straight until one day she whispered the word again. Or the boy who hadn't looked anyone in the eye in months, who suddenly handed a volunteer a drawing with 2 stick figures holding hands. Eli visited the center every few weeks with his father. He never had to participate, he was never made a symbol, but just being there gave the place a kind of quiet hope. Eli's voice didn't return overnight. After the morning, he whispered lion. It was weeks before he spoke again. Sometimes, he would still go entire days without saying a word. But the silence no longer felt like a wall, it was just space. A space Abby and now David were learning to live within, not fight against. At home, David changed too. He began leaving his phone in his office when they had dinner. He no longer rushed Eli through daily routines. Instead, he began asking questions with no expectations, just soft, open invitations. And sometimes, Eli would respond. One evening, as David tucked him and Eli pointed to the lion on his nightstand, the one Abby had given him. "Brave," he said softly, even when scared. David choked back tears. "Yes," he replied. "Just like you." Eli smiled. It was small, but it was real. At the diner, their routine continued. Every Saturday, without fail, they arrive on Lee now. Things were different. Eli would walk in, holding Abby's hand. Sometimes, he would color at the table. Sometimes he would tell Abby about his drawings, in halting, quiet words. Once, he brought her a folded piece of paper with a crayon lion on it, and the words "thank you." It was the first time he'd written anything outside of school. His teacher sent a note home later that month. Eli gave a presentation about lions to the class today. He whispered most of it, but everyone listened. He was proud. Eli was beginning to understand that his voice mattered, even when it was small, even when it was slow. And that made all the difference. The Maple and Pine Diner had changed. 2. Table 7 became unofficially known as Eli's table. The regulars started noticing the transformation not just in Eli, but in David. The once distracted tech giant now laughed softly at his son's jokes. He ordered the same pancakes every week, and he asked Abby about her foundation work, her family, her ideas. The staff watched as something rare unfolded to lives rebuilding in public. Not with grand declarations, but with pancakes, crayons, and slow, intentional presence. One morning, as they walked in, Eli tugged on David's coat. "I want to tell Abby," he whispered, "about my dream." Abby, wiping down the counter, turned when she heard her name. "What's up, Lionheart?" she asked gently. Eli stepped forward. "I want to be a teacher," he said, "like you." Abby's eyes welled with tears. She bent down and hugged him gently, letting him lead the embrace. "You're going to be an amazing one," she said. The moment was witnessed by no camera, no headlines, just a few customers sipping coffee, who smiled into their mugs and held the silence with reverence. The story of Eli Kingsley didn't end with a miracle cure. There was no viral video, no overnight transformation. Instead, it became something deeper, a reminder that kindness, consistency, and patience can reach even the most guarded hearts. In a world obsessed with fast results and clinical solutions, Abby reminded everyone that sometimes healing begins with simple gestures: a placemat, a plastic lion, a pancake with blueberry eyes. These were not tools of science, but of humanity. David Kingsley, once a man ruled by algorithms, came to understand that his greatest contribution to the world wasn't a new AI model, but the foundation that helped children find their voices. And Abby, once just a waitress, had become a beacon for families across the country who needed someone to say, "It's okay. You're not broken. You're just quiet." And I'm here. The Brave Voice initiative continued to grow. More centers opened. More children were seen, heard, and understood. And every Saturday, one boy and his father walked into a small-town diner with fogged windows and warm coffee. Because some places aren't just buildings. Some places are sanctuaries where silence is held gently until it's ready to speak.